Hello, everyone. My name is Dave Price, and I'm speaking to you from Washington, D.C., where I coordinate a project that I created called Talking About My Generation, the Baby Boom Experience. And I'm really proud to join with the newly formed group, Teachers Unify, to end gun violence and produce a podcast with the aim of doing just that, ending what I call the American tragedy of gun violence. Now, at Talking About My Generation, we produce books and articles and lectures and presentations and podcasts and webcasts and blogs and even tours, all dealing with baby boom interests. Now, many people, when they think of the baby boom era, think of the activism of the 60s and 70s. And indeed, that was a time when Americans took to the streets calling for social change, for civil rights, for women's rights, to end a war that we felt was unjust. And so here at Talking About My Generation, we like to continue projects in that activism vein. And indeed, this podcast will be one of them. Now, the podcast project actually had its genesis here. This is inside the museum, the now closed, a former Museum of News and First Amendment, located on Pennsylvania Avenue. And from 2017 to 2019, as part of the Talking About My Generation project, I delivered baby boom themed tours there. And on one of those tours, I met a Florida educator, Sarah Lerner. And Sarah's story, I will let her tell it. In fact, she's going to be on the first podcast. But we'll just say that Sarah and I learned very quickly that we had many things in common. For example, I'd been an English teacher in high school for 20 years, and Sarah was an English teacher in Florida. I had been a journalist for 12 years. Sarah had also been trained in journalism and was now serving as the yearbook advisor at the high school. And in the urban high school that I taught, while we never had any school shootings inside, the students that I taught all were way too familiar with gun violence and its effects. In fact, in the Bridgeton High School where I taught in New Jersey, urban district, of the approximately 2,000 students that I taught in my 20 years, 10, all males, either pled guilty or were convicted of murder. 9 of them are serving life sentences in prison, and the 10th is still awaiting execution in the state of Georgia. Sarah is a survivor of the horrific shooting in Parkland. So because of those two factors, we decided that we wanted to do something together to end this, what I call the American tragedy of guns and gun violence in communities, schools throughout America. So we were talking seriously at the end of 2019 about getting a project started, but as you're all aware, in March 2020, pandemic put changes to almost all our lives and all our plans. But now, Sarah and I are ready to unveil this podcast, Teachers Unify. And I think I'm going to call in Sarah here, since she's my podcasting partner, I guess you could say, for this project. And I'm going to let her talk a little bit about how the project is designed and what she hopes it accomplishes for all of us. Well, welcome, Sarah, my podcasting partner. Listen, I've been talking to the audience a little bit about my background, and a little bit about how we came together, and just very briefly about the idea of the podcast came to be. But why don't you tell the people why we actually chose to debut this video, which of course is not a podcast, on today, and why we are actually releasing the first episode of the podcast this week.
So I could not be more excited for the podcast and our joint venture here. It's been a long time coming, so I'm excited for people to hear it. We chose to release the Teachers Unify podcast today because it is February 14th, which is the 4th anniversary of the shooting that happened at my school, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, back in 2018. So it's an important day for the country. It's an important day here in the Parkland MSD community. And of course, it's an important day for me as a survivor of the gun violence and the shooting. The first official episode will drop on Thursday, which will be me telling my survivor story and talking about the organization that I co-founded with Abby Clements and Sari Beth Rosenberg called Teachers Unify to End Gun Violence, of which this podcast is an extension of the work that we'll be doing.